Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the TV Pilot's License Flight Number 2 with service to Wisteria Lane. We ask that you please fasten your headphones at this time and secure your podcasting device. And make sure to have your lawn mowing black tie outfit readily available. Welcome to the TV Pilot's License. My name is Geoff Curvis and I am joined by Max Singer and Rich Inman. Boys, how are you doing?
Oh, wishing I lived on Wisteria Lane right now. What an incredible pilot. I'm so excited to get into this.
What are the HOA fees at Wisteria Lane?
I mean,
first question.
What a great question. As a homeowner, I can only imagine it would be terrifying enough for me not to want a home, or one of the many reasons we'll come to find out we would not want to have a home on Wisteria Lane. For those who are just joining us for the second episode of TV Pilot's License, Max, why don't you tell us a little bit about what this podcast is all about?
We love TV pilots. We love seeing the creation and infancy of some of our favorite and least favorite TV shows. So each week, we're going to pick a show that is either famous or infamous, break it down, figure out what's working, what we love, and whether or not it can be made today. And we hope you'll join us for our flight.
Excellent. And Rich, right off the bat, before we dive into Desperate Housewives too deep, is there anything on your mind after watching the pilot?
Oh boy. Quite a bit. We get into so much in this show, but I think the number one thing is that everyone on the show seems to have drastically different incomes, yet they still live in very similar houses on the same street. It's a socialist paradise.
That's great to hear. One of the things that I was thinking about, and y'all can correct me if you think I'm going out of turn, but if I was to die, what would you guys bring to my potluck? Because there were a lot of different choices and options as far as food, some done very well and some done to the point of food poisoning.
If you die, I'm absolutely going bagel spread. I'm talking full schmears, smoked fishes, just every single flavor, even the ones that only the Goyim eat, like cinnamon raisin. We're just going a full assortment for you, bud.
I would say with your new move to Minnesota, I'm going the traditional tater tot hot dish, made up in any particular way I can think of. But I would say I'm going Ore-Ida, tater tots and or hash browns on the bottom. I think I got to stick with the classics. But what else goes in a hot dish?
Ore-Ida, not a sponsor, but I was going to say if either of you...
But friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod, not a sponsor.
Friend of the pod, potato company, Ore-Ida.
If either of you boys do pass and have an untimely death, I'm definitely bringing a dish that is good both hot and both cold. And that would be a noodle kugel with the frosted flakes on the top. Because not only can you have it, and Rich is giving me the look of...
Frosted Flakes.
Yes, it sounds terrible, but it is the most delicious thing because you can have it at any meal. It's a great breakfast dish. It's a great lunch dish if you want to have a nap, and it's a fantastic dinner dish. Highly recommend to those in the audience, if you have a wake that you are preparing for, bring a good noodle kugel.
Pause this.
You can
reach
into my DMs,
right now,
and I will happily give you my recipe.
Geoff Curvis making sure that our wakes are more than good. They're great.
Oh my god.
Oh my goodness. Well, before we dive in too deep to the plot of this podcast, I'd love to give you all that are listening a little bit of background. And let's just start off with what Desperate Housewives is about. We are told that the normal suburban life for a group of close-knit housewives takes a dark turn when one of their closest friends mysteriously commits suicide. Now, while trying to deal with their own hectic problems and romantic lives, each year brings on a new mystery and more dark and twisted events to come. With that synopsis in mind, Max, why don't you tell us a little bit of background about the show?
Oh man, so I hope y'all like hot goss, because that's what we're getting with creator and showrunner Mark Cherry. So Cherry is a producer and writer on The Golden Girls, and later its spinoff, The Golden Palace, which I'm pretty sure is where they buy a hotel and manage it. I'm not entirely sure there. He then has
episode coming soon.
A streak of bombs in the mid 90s to early 2000s. If you are familiar with the 5 Mrs. Buchanans, The Crew, or in 2001 he had a sitcom called Some of My Best Friends. I've heard of none of these. The last one's important though, because Some of My Best Friends, it comes out in the middle of 2001 and it stars Jason Bateman. And this show only lasts 8 episodes before it gets canned. And it's just one of those funny alternate universe things where if this show doesn't bomb so terribly and does get a second season renewal, we don't get Bateman as Michael Bluth on Arrested Development. And it's like, who knows where his entire career arc goes from there.
We would have had a Teen Wolf 3, though.
Ooh, I mean...
And who can say what's better?
Yeah, comment if you would rather have Teen Wolf 3 or Arrested Development.
Teen Wolf 3 Hive. Let's hear you.
So Mark Cherry starts working on this pilot for Desperate Housewives, and him and his agent, they take it everywhere. They go to HBO, they go to Fox, CBS, NBC, Showtime, and Lifetime, all of whom pass on this. Then, this is where it gets messy. So Mark Cherry's agent gets arrested and sentenced to jail for embezzling more than $250,000 from her clients over the years. Cherry gets a new rep because, agent's in jail. They get the pitch meeting set up with ABC and Disney, who finally greenlight this pilot after a lot of pushback.
She sounds like a really terrific agent front to back. I have absolutely no notes on how she failed to sell one of the longest running, basically primetime telenovelas possible, and then also wound up in jail for stealing an amount of money that wouldn't allow her to retire.
Listen, if your age is not embezzling from you, you ain't working in this town. So,
Hollywood corner.
Quick side note, the execs who did buy Desperate Housewives from Mark Cherry also were the people who bought Lost when that was getting shopped around and then got fired by Disney because they didn't like the direction they were taking the network and thought they were just buying flops.
Well, so, joke's on them. Wait till you ride the new Lost and Desperate Housewives rides at Disneyland.
Truly a sale straight out of Desperate Housewives itself. That's Mark Cherry.
Well, that is wild. And, it seems almost appropriate with this type of show, right? This show seems to have many twists and turns, but as you have heard from the start, we are all about the pilot. So let's dive in to this journey. And we start in what seems almost like a Stepford Wives verse neighborhood, Wisteria Lane, and we are introduced to Mary Alice, who is the narrator of our show, speaking very much in the present tense. And we find out within the first minute of the show that although Mary Alice is speaking in the present tense, she is very much dead. She has committed suicide, and
I was actually shocked by that 90 seconds in. I did not see that coming at all. I've never seen this show, full disclosure, and that actually totally caught me off guard.
It's definitely something where you feel like Mary Alice is going to be the protagonist. Any traditional pilot, that sort of intro, 90 seconds in, you're thinking, oh wow, we're going to follow Mary Alice's journey through Wisteria Lane, only to be caught off guard of, no, we're not. It seems that Mary Alice is only going to be a disembodied voice for us. When it comes to Mary Alice, one of the number one questions that I have to ask you guys about is, do we believe that ghosts are real in this universe? As she seems to have a knowledge of not only what has happened, but what is going to happen.
Hey, Geoff, I have a quick question for you. So Wisteria Lane is also the filming location of the classic 90s film Casper with Devon Sawa. Do you think that because they filmed Casper on this block that ghosts are real?
You have to think that this might actually exist in the universe of Casper, which means do we have
the Devon Sawa effect, yes.
A Casper cinematic universe? And is Desperate Housewives a part of that, or is Casper a part of the Desperate Housewives universe?
Are we ready to experience how friendly Mary Alice can be? Because it seems like the character is extremely well liked across the board. But is there a potential that this block needs busted?
I am fully willing to buy into the idea that every single thing that shoots on the same part of a backlot is interconnected in some way. I'm ready to dive into that Hollywood theory.
This is one block from the Jaws set. It's part of the Jaws universe.
Yeah,
Wisteria Lane.
there is an ocean right behind these houses.
That's why they're so valuable. It definitely, having this start with a murder, does seem almost very contrasting to a lot of television and a lot of dark comedies that we have grown used to at this time of like around 2004. But it does allow for us to push the plot forward and meet the rest of the cast at Mary Alice's wake. And rather than in this podcast and then this episode try to follow each of the characters and the journey of this plot as one continuous thing, I'd like to follow each of the characters' arcs as a whole and their journey throughout this 45 minutes of television. And let's start with probably one of the more notable actresses that joined this podcast, or excuse me, not the podcast. She joined Desperate Housewives.
Friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod, Felicity Huffman playing Lynette Stravo. And, when you met Lynette, when you saw her exposition piece, what came to your mind about this character initially?
So Lynette's intro is one of several just amazing specific character lines where they talk about her fried chicken recipe, but on this occasion she had store-bought. And it's like such a just oddly specific thing to describe this character who has all of this like innate skill and passion, but is overwhelmed and isn't able to do those things. Seeing the juxtaposition of her career arc versus where she is, you get the sense of the pain of like what is expected of like an American housewife to take care of her family, and like the way her husband like kind of bullies her into that path, because that's what it is. It's like they show her getting bullied into like a means that she doesn't want.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting character type because you instantly meet Lynette. And one of the great things that I love watching, I'm not a parent, right? But I love watching parenting techniques as a whole because every parent has a different style. And you know that Lynette is extremely clever, extremely witty by how she's dealing with her terrible twins that she has by showing them just a small little piece of paper and saying, "This is Santa's phone number." And instantly I think to myself, I'm going to love this character.
That is also the only indication of what time period we're in this show. Like somehow Desperate Housewives feels a little stuck in time. Like it could be anywhere in the void of the universe except for referencing Santa Claus's cell phone number.
Who famously did not get a cell phone until 2003. It's totally late to the game. And I don't know if you guys do recognize this, but the absolute grip those twins had on the twin acting roles in that period of time, because they were also the set of twins from Cheaper by the Dozen.
What? Really?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
That is what a pull.
The death grip of the twin acting community.
What was your quote for this?
Well, he got to double it.
To take Lynette a little bit outside and talk a little bit more about Felicity Huffman, we see and we start to learn how desperate Lynette is to be able to maintain this image of being the stay-at-home mom, of being able to handle having 4 children that she seems entirely overwhelmed by a scene that absolutely is supposed to be comical, of seeing her go into a pool at a funeral to handle her children. But also, I had to giggle a little bit because I kept on thinking, wow, Felicity Huffman really will do anything for her children if you know anything about the Varsity Blues scandal and her brief time period in jail.
I actually don't know about that, but and I'm super excited to hear that story. The one thing I noticed immediately is, why didn't you take your heels off before you got in the pool? What a crazy thing. She didn't save any time by keeping them on. I don't know what she was thinking about that. I do really love Lynette as like, her personality dealing with as much as she has to. She has the least believable story for me of why, how she just resigned herself to being a stay-at-home mom rather than, because she has the means, she has the corporate background and everything. They explained very clearly how well she was doing at her job, but I think she has the least believable story for why she's at home, if that makes sense.
I think the show does a fantastic job of taking a lot of different characters we've seen across media and putting them all into one episode. And I almost imagine Lynette as the representation of the 50s era's housewife, right? But more of you have the choice between a career and you have the choice between being a stay-at-home mom. And we're going to talk about Lynette's husband a little bit because my, oh my, I have thoughts. But one of the things that I think Lynette does is show that, she has this husband who really believes in the power of family and the power of having someone at home to take kids. And her love is so strong for her husband that she is willing to pass off what looked to be, and we saw the supermarket scene, her old coworker saying, wow, we thought you would have been running the company by now if you stayed, into what seemed to be a very much you know what, I could have been, but I'm going to stay at home and I'm going to, threaten my husband over the cell phone while shopping at the supermarket.
The best line of the entire show, or the entire pilot, not now kids, mommy's threatening daddy. That was a put the remote down type moment.
You definitely see Lynette as someone who's been forced to take concessions in their life and where that's gotten them now, but also creates a character where you really want to see what is lying below that surface and sets you up in a really interesting way, I think.
It's very much a character that is not, you can tell Lynette is very strong, but does not show vulnerability often, which was something that caught me. But let's talk a little bit about, she threatened her husband over the phone. He was supposed to be gone in Fresno for another week, and suddenly appears with a football in hand for a nice little 24-hour visit. What are our thoughts on Lynette's husband, Mr. Stravo?
Never trust a man who spends more than a week in Fresno voluntarily.
Absolutely. Or is okay having sex unprotected and just saying, let's risk it. I was how do you even come back from that? It is completely unredeemable in my eyes. And God, does she have a great left hook.
You have a guy here and her husband who, you mentioned Geoff, he values this idea of family and the community. And I think he's someone who, although he doesn't say it, puts so much stock in the family status in Wisteria Lane, and he wants a certain ideal for his family, but also doesn't need to be there to help create that ideal. It's like he puts the onus onto Lynette to take care of these things while he just goes off and does what he wants to do, and he can come back and be like, super dags, he brought a football, not even in the packaging, just found a football.
Here, kids, get some scissors.
A loose football in a bag that definitely did not have enough clothes for a additional week in Fresno. I think he's wearing the same suit every single day, just hopefully buying shirts while he is there.
Wait.
Do not trust this man.
What's wrong with that?
Well,
I do want to hear, Geoff, about the Varsity Blues scandal if you do want to bring that up, because I know
will give the TLDR because oh my goodness, is this wild. Well, there was a gigantic scandal. There are so many podcasts and documentaries about this, but there was a man who
Wait, why was it called Varsity Blues? I know exactly what you're talking about right now. Why was it called Varsity Blues? I was like, did she ruin the production of the movie Varsity Blues?
No, so it was named the Varsity Blues case by the FBI, who was doing the basically had this case and were trying to figure out this college admissions scandal. And Felicity Huffman participated in basically a pay for admissions by giving a gigantic donation, taking a scholarship from a NCAA athlete so that her child could go to a prestigious university.
The famously cheeky FBI naming the investigation after a classic teen movie of the 90s.
That's unbelievable. The entire time you had that note sitting there, I was like, what connection does she have to the movie Varsity Blues?
She originally was going to star as the love interest in Varsity Blues, but, it might have been a little bit of an age difference.
And as a true breakthrough, as a pioneer in the acting world, or just as a white woman in general, one of the few people to actually serve time for a white-collar crime. So bravo, Felicity Huffman.
Bravo.
This episode has
indeed.
already involved 2 instances of white-collar crimes, and it's also the second week in a row that Varsity Blues has come up in some way, shape, or form after discussing Ali Larder and the Entourage pilot.
Well, I can't wait to watch the Varsity Blues pilot then.
Well,
It's called a movie, Rich.
let's talk a little bit about one of Lynette's friends and move on to a very different type of desperate, and that's Gabrielle Solis. Eva Longoria, this was very much a breakout role for her. Not exactly the biggest name on the scene. She was sort of a surprise to be in this cast, but she also brings what I'll say was a refreshing style of comedy. What were your thoughts on Gabrielle Solis, how Eva Longoria really just dominated this role?
Yeah, she definitely has the broadest comedy and the most physical comedy in this episode, like far and away. And it's just so fun seeing, especially when an actor is like physically smaller in stature than the people they're in scenes with, their scene partners, and then just seeing them still dominate those scenes. Like Eva Longoria in every single scene in this pilot is just an absolute force of nature and really shows such physical chops. I love, love, love everything with the lawnmower scene that we'll probably touch into in just a minute, so I'm going to save it. But yeah, absolute physical powerhouse.
100%. And then use that to pivot into her role as Mark Sanchez's girlfriend, which will tie back to our Entourage episode. Former Jets All-Star, Mark Sanchez. Speaking of physical comedy.
As far as a little bit of background on Gabrielle Solis, we learned that she was a model in New York, shortest runway model that probably has ever existed in all time. I instantly
Least
thought,
believable part of this.
I mean,
that runway
as
is so short.
As a fan of America's Next Top Model, I instantly knew, she would have gotten very poor walking scores on the runway, as everyone who watches that show now knows what a model walk looks like. We come to find out she meets the man of her dreams because he has a gigantic checkbook and is willing to buy her everything and anything that her heart desires. But, that does not exactly mean happiness by any means of the word. Looking at her desperation to continue to find happiness, even though she seems to have the world at her fingertips, how did that connect to you?
Well, as someone who has everything, famously, I connected a lot with this character. But no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said, especially, I think it had a lot of parables to the Hollywood dream, really, in general, of having fame and money and everything, like, more superficial that you could have possibly asked for. And then he uses probably one of the most devastating lines in the episode of, maybe I didn't want the right things. After explaining that she's been given everything she's wanted, but doesn't really want the right stuff.
Yeah, and with Gabrielle, you also have the second partner in a row where they have a particular obsession, and with her husband, it's fiscal, it's monetary. He uses very specific dollar amounts when referring to the things that he's gifted her, and how he uses that as a way to hold power over her. Hearing him list the values of like a specific necklace, like he has that burned into the back of his mind, like that has to get at you when you have a partner who holds things over you constantly, and does often lead you into the arms of Jesse Metcalfe.
As it normally does in real life for anyone. We all fall for Jesse Metcalfe when our needs aren't being met in that way. Jesse Metcalfe, Do we need to go into Jesse Metcalf? Anything?
Yeah, I really do want to go into the idea that I love the idea of Gabrielle Solis because it's almost like fantasy fulfillment, right? Of the joke of, oh, the rich woman having an affair with the gardener, who, if you continue to watch the show, I will admit, I've seen every episode of Desperate Housewives. It is such a great arc of Jesse Metcalf just killing it, being given very much a juicy role that seems one-dimensional at first, of just this kid who seems to have more care and affection for the woman he's having a tryst with than you would give credit to a younger man for. But Jesse Metcalf, in the short amount of screen time that he had, caught me as a character that was really just digging into what he was given, but also a terrible gardener.
Yeah, I think, and we'll comment on his lawn mowing skills in a moment, but I really think that Jesse Metcalf really set himself up to be a recurring character, like a long time recurring character, simply from this first episode. Because how believable is it that someone who, we don't know how old he is based on this pilot episode, but he establishes himself as someone who legitimately cares about Eva Longoria's character, and start asking more probing questions about hey, why are we doing this? Not just ooh, I get to bang older woman. I get to sleep with the former model. He is really on board with finding out why we're doing this, and it seems like he has kind of established more of a heart of gold type for his character.
It's a very interesting contrast to Carlos, her husband, because when you look at Carlos is one of the few characters, because I think that every character in the show has some form of a flaw. That is good writing. You never want to have the Superman effect of someone that just seems to only have one small weakness, but really otherwise there's nothing wrong with them. Carlos seems like the most despicable and selfish of all the characters on the show. And it allows for you, really, when it comes to Gabrielle, to say, you know what, even though she's having an affair on her husband and he's pimping her out to his clients, which just blew my mind, you come to the place where you're like, wow, he really does suck.
Even in 2004, pretty gross.
Carlos feels like this sort of old Hollywood villain in a way, where it's like everything he does drives at this person. It feels nefarious. It feels evil. It feels like he should have a very sleek little mustache at times. But yeah, it's true. He, belittles his wife. He insults her. He holds things over her head. He allows her to be sexually harassed for boosting his own business purposes and his financial gains. Again, a dollar amount tied to the business that he does with that client at that party. And yeah, he is one-dimensional in such an old classic Hollywood kind of way. And I hate him. I hate him.
Yeah,
I wish nothing well for him.
A lot of unredeemable men in this show.
He's one of the few, I would say that of the men in this show, many of them are well-intentioned, or many of them have some form of...
Not Carlos.
But yeah, many. I use the word many very choicefully, because if you look at, Tom Scavo, and you look at, we're going to talk about Mike Delfino. We're absolutely going to talk about Mike Delfino. But you look at these men and the husbands, and there is some form of good intent behind them. But Carlos really, you see his relationship with Gabrielle and you think, oh, wow, he sees her almost as an item or something that is a part of his home and not someone whom he has a relationship with.
She's just another thing with an intrinsic dollar value to him.
Exactly.
And I don't want to talk about him anymore, Geoff.
Yeah, and you know what? Let's move on from the Solises. I think that is the correct plural term for that. And let's talk about a very different genre of woman. And that's Bree Vanderkamp. Bree Vanderkamp is a woman that, quite frankly, her introduction terrified me.
Oh, yeah.
It gives this Stepford Wives feel.
Very similar to Mary Alice, really.
Yeah, there's a slight almost, it's almost like Mary Alice with a little bit more, like times 1.2, 1.3. You hear her talking about, oh, she does woodworking. Oh, she does all of her own gardening. Oh, we come to learn that she spends 3 to 4 hours making a meal. Seems like this perfect woman who is trying to almost, is too perfect, right? We see that first interaction. It's almost an alien interaction where she has the 2 baskets of different muffins. One, and this scripted, beautifully scripted, because I love when an actor, you can hear them talk and you can tell that they're putting in this tone that is allowing for it to almost feel alien amongst a very normal crew.
Well, taking it back to the intro, when you first start this episode, before we meet a single character, you see this really almost 2 color corrected palette with the sky and the grass and the buildings, and everything feels a little off. And then when you meet Lynette, you have a contrast to that. You meet someone who is a little removed from that. And so what makes Bree interesting is that she blends into that palette so well that it does come across as a little creepy and intimidating and alien. It feels like there's something off here. And Geoff, you had mentioned that idea of like the Superman effect earlier. Here's a character where they're really trying to make you believe that they are a perfect, unflawed individual. And that is just really, really unnerving in a way.
One of the beautiful choices that this show made when we were introduced to the Vanderkamps is Bree versus her family. As you see Bree standing out and her family almost slumped behind her. And it's one of the, as we go, we move on from the funeral and the wake, Bree is very much trying to make sure that they are organizing how they're going to deal with getting rid of Mary Alice's clothes. She very much seems like the leader of the gang, or the person who is going to make sure that stuff happens.
Well, self-appointed too.
Yeah, very much. She is going to take hold, and she is going to be very much the boss of that group. What was interesting, though, is seeing the contrast of that in her own home. We're introduced to, the idea she made asabuco and basil soup for her children. They almost have the palates of a 4-year-old because they start talking about navy bean soup and pork and beans, and how, you did not need to
They just want beans.
To only then try to, in this case, be almost passive to her husband, wanting to have some form of support, for him to say nothing.
I love this dinner sequence so much. I love the phrase cream of basil soup. Again, it's such an odd specific, and Mark Cherry has so many of those moments in here. I love having a child shout exasperated, "Why can't we eat normal soup?" It's such a delightful thing to antagonize her about. And again, pork and beans feels like one of those dishes of mid-century, early suburbia, where it's like we're revolutionizing the ability to have like dinner on the table super quick for the entire family, the birth of TV dinners and freezer foods, and the growth of like the American chain supermarket. And pork and beans feels like one of those just like simple, you dump it in a pot, you put it on the plate, your family's fed, that allows you to like do X, Y, and Z that are put on your plate as well. And Bree is just like fighting against all of that and trying to be more than that. Like she's trying to be like truly like the Superman effect.
Well, that's why I think she has. I mean, I thought, in my opinion, this is one of the more fascinating characters, because you get the reveal as the episode goes along. She wasn't always like this. I think her husband says at the end, it's like, I miss the woman who used to burp and drink milk and laugh or something like that. It was like I forgot the three, but like I think she has the most fascinating transformation because her character asks a lot more questions for future like reveals down the season, and I really like that. I mean, we didn't even hear the husband talk until what, halfway through the episode, and that was, you know, I thought there was a chance, like having never seen this before, I thought there was a chance that her husband might not talk at all the whole episode.
Well, what does he eventually call it? He says he's tired of her living in a detergent commercial. Again,
Yes.
it's such a brilliant specific, but yeah, it is that, you know, eerie, cheery, ear-to-ear smile with the perfect apron, and we get the stains out, and nothing's wrong, but figs are wrong.
Yeah, she's the only person I think that has so much backstory that we don't really get into yet in that first pilot episode, and I'm super excited to watch more to just find out what broke Bree.
So the facade sort of breaks when we're taken to, after this whole debacle of eating normal people food, we go to what I can only assume is a Texas roadhouse, because we have the loaf of bread with the steak knife sticking in it. Keep in mind, whoever was the continuity person on the set screwed up because there were two different loaves of bread that show up in different scenes. I noticed that and I was like, ooh, love it. Let me take that and I will keep that forever. But we come to find out, all right, her children are playing video games and the husband finally just says, hey, I want a divorce. And Bree's reaction is she suddenly becomes a femme fatale and takes advantage of her unwittingly. And I have to ask, I think it was something that was completely by mistake, right? Where she thought to herself, okay, I'm making a salad, and that split second and that crack in perfection shows up, and she accidentally poisons her husband, sending him to the hospital, where then, Rich, as you said, there was this almost hauntingly beautiful monologue from him as he's sitting in a hospital bed, still wanting a divorce, saying, you know, I married a woman who was imperfect, and I loved those imperfections, but now where has she gone? And then we start to see another crack in the armor of this really beautiful and sad scene or change of seeing Bree silently sob in a hospital bathroom as she's trying to play the facade of, oh, I'm perfect, as she leaves the bathroom.
Yeah, I truly believe that. I think her transformation from whatever she was to whatever this is currently, the basically Martha Stewart of the neighborhood, is probably one of the most unrelatable transformations for me. That's why I think there's so much depth in behind what broke her to do this, because I have never had that inclination to be just like overwhelmingly like, I'm just gonna spend all my life like, you know, fixing these insane meals or knocking out all these like beautiful home projects, like, you know, the separate muffin baskets for the family and the and the rest of the people at the wake.
I think what's tough for Bree is that she's damned if she does and she's damned if she doesn't, because her husband can say, I want this person who does all of these things that she used to, but if you look at the competition in the neighborhood and you look at the things that like Lynette was forced to sacrifice, who's to say that if Bree is that person that her husband says, that she's not viewed as not doing enough or living up to an expectation set for herself? But on the other hand, if she does all of those things to the degree that she does, you know, she's suddenly also doing something wrong. It's like there's no situation here where Bree can win. But this is a really sharp individual. I love her line at dinner about not discussing divorce in a place where the bathrooms are labeled chicks and dudes. I think that she's so observant, and I'm also glad that she gave us the concept of Chekhov's onions, where if you introduce an onion allergy in Act 1, you must attempt to kill your husband with onions in Act 3.
Famous. Max is a studied and learned actor from the Indiana University School of Acting. I don't know, theatrical arts, something. The old acting check.
Acting and onions.
So, while Bree Vanderkamp very much has felt the need to change herself based off of Wisteria Lane and the pressure of the neighborhood, let's move on to Susan, who very much seems to just be herself and Terry Hatcher playing a character who is a very much an oddity within Wisteria Lane. She is a single mom of an older child. Susan's character I found a little bit confusing in the idea of they have Terry Hatcher, big name actress, coming in, and they don't know what to do with her. Is she supposed to be the antagonist? Is she supposed to be the buffoon of she overcooked the macaroni and cheese, she undercooked it, she salted it? We get introduced almost to the idea of Susan's a bit of a wild card based off of the macaroni and cheese she's bringing to the wake.
I personally have, I think she's my favorite character of the group so far. I know that there's, turmoil among, the actual cast and everything like that, offset. But personally, I thought Susan had the most relatable story. She kind of resigned herself to not dating, to, basically forcing herself to be asexual once her husband left for her secretary. Has an extremely adult relationship with her young daughter, who speaks like a fully grown, gossiping adult. And personally, my favorite relationship of the entire show so far is the way she and her, communicate and how open they are talking about, very adult subjects.
All their seasons at home together are just so delightful. She's such a great counterpart for Susan to bounce off of. They're delightful together.
It's also really interesting. Mark Sherry did an excellent job when he was writing this relationship of just ripping off that band-aid of yes, this daughter and her mother are going to talk about sex a lot. And it's not something that is going to be a little bit taboo. It is going to be something that is a part of their relationship. And one of the things that I think, Rich, that probably is one of the relatable parts about Susan is Susan does play the typical lead of a show where she is at a wake meeting our show hunk, Mike Delfino, the plumber who is new to the neighborhood, renting a gorgeous home, and very much the eligible bachelor of the show. What are our thoughts initially about Mike Delfino?
Oh, I mean, perfect addition. His backstory is also a little confusing, which is why I think we ended up with that twist at the end of the episode, that there's almost no real reason that he's just part of this neighborhood. He's just I'm house sitting, I'm renting, and a single guy with, hands down, the lowest income of everyone on this block. And I'm wondering just where, how did none of this raise any red flags? It's okay, everyone's a CEO or, an extremely important business person or, a really gifted child illustrator and book author. And then all of a sudden, plumber.
What's fun with Mike and that kind of thing too is that this whole show just is a love letter to so many different types of dramas from throughout the years, and it explores so many different relationships, and Mark cherry picks the elements that it wants to from each of them to create this fantasia that is Wisteria Lane. And so just the blue collar mysterious stranger amongst the people of privilege is just another one of those characters that get plugged into this world so well. And he's also just such a nice contrast to the other men. And I think that's what draws not just Susan, but everyone to him, is that, Mike isn't like the other men that we know.
And Max, you mentioned Mike isn't like the other men, and Mike draws the attention of multiple people on Wisteria Lane. We'll talk about Edie in a little bit, but I want to continue with Susan because Susan, she pursues Mike. You can tell she's very timid around this. She has been out of the dating game for a while. I've never seen
and her daughter lets her know it.
Yeah, her daughter lets her know that, boy, oh boy, you need to learn some things while she is building a Trojan horse which I thought
I was about
fantastic.
to say, she literally puts a Trojan horse down her sink drain to get Mike to come over to spend one-on-one time. The visual gag of a Trojan horse out of every little contraption her daughter could have made. It's so smart.
But also, I have to yell at the continuity person again, because there were just full popsicle sticks in the disposal. They didn't even try to snap them or break them or anything.
You go work for a props department, Geoff. You go work for a props department.
They just told a PA, we need popsicle sticks in a sink, and you to try your hardest. And that PA did what he was told. But I have to yell at the person who knew what they were doing. You don't blame the person who's told what to do. You blame the person who tells them what to do.
Do you know how many Ralph's grocery stores that PA had to go to in the greater Burbank area to find popsicle sticks so people like you won't give them shit?
Two. They went to two Ralphs.
Two Ralphs, and then they had to be back on set. But we can definitely tell that there's a lot of chemistry between these characters. It's really a well-written will they, won't they. Will her character find love, and you root for her in this sense. But one of the things that we have to talk about with Susan is Susan definitely is a felon. When trying to make sure that Mike Delfino is not having a relationship of the sexual nature with Edie, she burns down Edie's house while having a mental breakdown.
All right, we're going to enter the fire safety portion of our podcast, which we go over at every...
Fire safety with Rich.
First of all, Edie left the room with 6,000 candles lit in her apartment next to the drapes. Even if Susan didn't knock anything over, really horrifying idea. What absolutely god-awful fire safety happening in Wisteria.
Yeah, there's a terrible open flame to tapestry ratio happening in Edie Britt's home.
Absolutely, and God knows what other oils were present at the scene of the crime, and I don't think this becomes any. I don't think this blame shifts onto Susan at any point.
Yeah, you have to wonder if Mark Sherry in future episodes is like, I'm gonna bring back that felony person and see if we can tie that.
Everything's a plot point. Everything's a plot point.
Meanwhile, Jeff's watching episode 2, be like, continuity issue. The house is back.
Well, one of the things that this does reveal is Mike Delfino and Edie are not having a sexual tryst, right? Instead, he was out and about, and we come to learn that there might be a little bit more to Mike. He, for some reason, owns a firearm in suburbia. With that said about Susan, and looking at the characters, I do have to give a special constellation shout out to two other characters. And one, let's give a quick just couple minutes to talk about Edie, who is very much a contrasting character to the other 5 women that we met, including Mary Alice.
So Edie has maybe one of my favorite introductions from a script I've heard in a pilot episode, which is they describe Edie as being the most predatory divorcee in a 5-block radius, which that's just it. You get an action and intent behind her, you learn about her background, and it really establishes not just Edie, but the size of this world in general and how much goes down in such a small area. And so I know off the jump, the second she walks in and Mary Alice reads that little bit of exposition, I know what I need to know about Edie. Edie also is really bold and kind of hammy. The line about asking Mike the plumber to take a look at her pipes, super campy. Also love the first time that Susan goes over And Edie says that I was making ambrosia and I made too much. Who the hell is making that much ambrosia salad? It's
It is ambrosia
disgusting.
salad and not a drink, right? Because she is holding a bottle of something.
Because there is the food, there is the drink, and you have to wonder, maybe it was both. Maybe she's just having an ambrosia cook-off.
See, I assumed it was ambrosia salad, and Edie's just making the most disgusting type of salad known to man. But
What is
also
ambrosia salad?
throwing
For
it
those of
back.
us not in the know.
I think it's like one of those salads that has like whipped cream and fruit and stuff in it, and you find it like at the end of a Ruby Tuesday salad bar. But it's also one of those dishes that's really big in like mid-century American cookbooks. So I was like, okay, we've made references to pork and beans. Now we have ambrosia salad. It's just this idea of like mid-century, we're out of time. It's perfect American suburb. But it also could have been liquor. I could be wrong.
Yeah, and Edie is definitely the character, as, you know, if you continue to watch the show, you hope they use her as a plot device of something to stir up trouble amongst the women, maybe create a little bit of drama, maybe be that character that's the thorn in every other leading character's side. I do have to talk about the last character, though. This show came out towards the end, very similar to Entourage, of Sex and the City. And everyone talks about how New York is a character in Sex and the City, and Wisteria Lane is very much a character, maybe the villain of Desperate Housewives. And what do you think of, you know, we only get small glimpses of life on Wisteria Lane, but what do you think of Wisteria Lane as this background, as this setting for this show?
Oh boy. I mean, I think so many different parts of this are deep indicators of what you see at this particular time of like trying to expose suburbia, which, you know, obviously harkens back to like the period of time where, you know, Stepford Wives was coming and, you know, was a commentary on how people were living these cookie cutter lives. But I think once we get into like Wisteria Lane and how they depict suburbia, I think we have more of a commentary that's similar to like Weeds, where it's like, yeah, a Grestic might look perfect, but look what's happening on the inside. You know, Mary Louise Parker's character is just a means to an end of the desires of suburbia. And I think Edie is a perfect example, like you said, Max, with that 5-block radius thing. That it's like, oh, it's gonna happen again 5 blocks over. I think that's also a commentary on like how much these types of characters evolve or revolve around suburbia, and how much like by having this like by investing in a quote unquote perfect life, which seems very like gated community, like, you know, we owe the neighbors dinner, that kind of thing, devolves into like, I'm gonna have an affair, I'm going to kill myself, my husband has a secret, my husband is gonna get punched in the face, that kind of thing.
I
Like,
love the notion of calling it a character in itself. It's a really fun way to look at it, Geoff, because Wisteria Lane is so heightened and bold and controlling and like dominating on the screen itself. You have such a rich, heightened, overly colored color palette to it. The way the music is scored in Wisteria Lane, you know, a beautiful title sequence from Danny Elfman on this show, but the way that it like segues and changes, like really underscores and hits hard. People move throughout Wisteria Lane in such a choreographed way from the very beginning. The way that someone jogs past a house in a certain tempo, the way that people file into Mary Alice's wake feels like a dance. Gabrielle's dinner with her husband in that flashback feels very dancey. The way we pan in, the way we look across homes, the way we move up and down and sideways as we transition. It feels haunting and unsettling, and it feels like this bubble that could burst at any moment. And I think it's also worth shouting out that this is shot on a stretch of the Universal Studios backlot called Colonial Street, since redubbed Wisteria Lane due to the show's success, which is meant to be the ideal cookie cutter suburban street. It dates back like 80 years of stuff filmed on here, from Leave It to Beaver, The Munsters, Harvey with Jimmy Stewart, getting to like the 80s and 90s, The Burbs with Tom Hanks, Shaggy Dog, Casper, Beethoven. So like literally having it on this cookie cutter street, I love it because this show only works as of how staged it feels. This is a show that wouldn't work to me or be as effective if you shot it on location. It needs everything to look a little facade. So yeah, I don't think it's just a character. I think it's the main character, really.
That's such a good point because it feels like the street is made for those crane shots, those high above shots. Geoff, I'm looking at your background right now for reference, but it feels like even the houses seem like small just so they can try to fit more in there. There's like a puppet master feel almost to how they're moving, how the choreography of the city.
It almost reminds me, Max, you said haunting, and it reminds me of Tim Burton and Edward Scissorhands specifically.
I thought the same thing the moment the opening credits came up, yeah.
I'm brought back, and I'm expecting Johnny Depp to just walk out with,
Nope, don't want that. Don't want that.
Very dangerous.
I'm the gardener now.
We've gotten through a lot of the plot. We've talked about a lot of the characters. Did we miss anything else that y'all loved about this pilot?
Ooh, one of the best connecting pieces of bringing information from character to character so there have no other communication aspect. I think there were very few phone calls. No one was using a cell phone or anything like that. Mrs. Huber except Santa Claus. Mrs. Huber, I think, is the perfect device for spreading town gossip, which creates more chaos in the same way that Edie creates more chaos for everyone. But Mrs. Huber seems to be the perfect. She just happens to be at the restaurant where Bree's husband is poisoned. Just happens to hear Mary Alice killing herself, and it kind of just inserts herself as that little narc character that spins the chaos and starts the storytelling between the characters.
Yeah, the main antagonist is just this sweet little old lady far and away.
I want to call you on sweet because she steals a dead woman's blender, and that's really not cool because that family still needs a blender. It's not just
dead
Mary
women
Alice's.
Can't blend.
But I will say Mrs. Huber's character is a really powerful tool that I think that Mark Sherry used of being able to allow her to almost act as the audience, of giving these small pieces of insight, having these great single jokes of bringing back the mac and cheese joke and saying that, hey, I'm here because we were all at the funeral. This is how small of a town it was. And I did get food poisoning. Hey, Lynette, your children are in the pool. Hey, I was at the Texas Roadhouse. The only character that you don't see her really interact with outside of that is she doesn't really interact with Gabrielle Solis so much, but instead I think that's the character of the gardener in this case, right? That is the exception to the rule. Did Sex and the City pave the way for this show to be able to be as successful as it was?
I feel like maybe you're getting a little caught up on Mary Alice using the "and just like that" phrase from Sex and the City a lot. But like I mentioned before, what's so cool about Desperate Housewives is how much of a love letter it is to different genres of TV. I think it's clear that Mark Cherry is just a TV fan because you see kind of this throwback to a genre from the 80s of the primetime soap shows like Dallas, Dynasty, Knots Landing that really went out of vogue in the 90s. And clearly this is someone who really likes those shows but wants to add a comedic twist to it. It's easy to say that Susan and her daughter are very reminiscent of Rory and Lorelai from Gilmore Girls, but more adult primetime. And so that's just so fun. And this show revitalizes that primetime soap, but it hasn't gone as well as Desperate Housewives. I don't know. Do you guys think there's a reason why we're drawn to this mess and this bad behavior on TV?
We love gossip. I mean, this is to throw in a little bit of comparison outside of our regular American TV landscape. This is a telenovela that takes place at 8 p.m. on Wednesday night or whenever it was on. This is a lot of these items of oh, she was so quiet until she killed herself. But she has a secret, and then the husband's digging up something inside the pool, and then someone runs off with their secretary, and then I think a lot of this screams like non-American drama, which I think just has like a lot of gossipy elements, a lot of over the top like performances, a lot of over the top plot points and everything. And I think that's really, I definitely think the Sex and the City comparison opened up the amount of female sexuality that people felt comfortable showing on primetime. And I think that definitely like pushed the window over a bit to what American audiences are going to be comfortable with, because like sex exists in all forms and all genders in like seemingly every other country but ours until fairly recently.
And Rich, you mentioned the like the digging in the pool and like the dramatic dialogue. This show has also just some of the best dramatic transitions in between sequences, like at the wake when it's like something must have been going on and we just cut to a man behind a wall glaring and sipping whiskey, showing a scene up from the pool with the line like things were below the surface. I love it was the sound of a family secret. I don't know what that means. I want to know what that means. Like lines like that keep me hooked. And then you end up with just this perfect final line of oh, Mary Alice, what did you do? And the crane shot that pulls out. It's like they just leave you with these lingering questions and glimpses
so many questions
of images that don't quite make sense, but you want to know why we're seeing this man drinking whiskey, why we're seeing this pool shot, why is this man digging?
Why does Mike have a gun?
Mary Alice do?
Well, you talk about why and it drawing you in. And boy, when we look at how this show did overall, this show absolutely killed it. It had 8 total seasons. It had 180 episodes. It won 71 different awards on 273 nominations. So that's about a 25% hit rate. Couple of other interesting things, right? Just the premiere season won 6 Emmy Awards, 2 Golden Globes, and 2 SAG Awards. And almost every single leading lady that we talked about received an Emmy and Golden Globe nomination other than Eva Longoria, which was very hotly contested, and Mark Sherry was very outspoken about how he disagreed with that. A little bit about the director of the pilot. The director's name was Charles McDougall, who you may or may not know. You heard us talking about Sex and the City influences. He was the director of Sex and the City for many episodes. He also was the co-creator of Queer as Folk, and he also won an Emmy for directing this episode of Desperate Housewives. He absolutely killed it. This show also premiered, I believe, around the same time as Grey's Anatomy, which is still running, which is a wild thing to say out loud, but it's very much, the critics have said about this first episode, it was exciting, it made soap operas not tacky to be watching, and it was something that allowed for the revival of ABC, which at that point in time was in a little bit of a scary space of not knowing what to do. So with all that being said, knowing the history of this show, if you look at this pilot as a standalone, could this pilot be made today? And was there anything that would have to be done differently?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They could make that today and pitch it successfully. I think this and Shonda Rhimes shows are the formula now. I think that is like, if you want something, I think this and this paved the way for shows like the Anna Delvey like docuseries and stuff like that. Well, I mean the dramatic docuseries.
What she did because of Desperate Housewives.
Yeah, that's right. She was probably 9 when the show came out, and that's definitely what made her have that character change. But I think that you can absolutely sell something like this today, especially with how like airtight this pilot is. I think you get to know all the characters. You have a story that comes to a beginning, middle, and end during the pilot, and it also asks so many more questions than it answers. I think that you could sell this in a heartbeat in 2022.
Yeah, agreeing with Rich, we're in such a period right now of like nostalgia fever too, that all of the references and things that made Desperate Housewives, like all those ingredients, are so in vogue now that I think it'd be really easy to sell this show as this like, sexual murder mystery that draws inspiration from the 80s and 90s and now. It feels timeless and evergreen, which is super cool too. It doesn't feel overtly 2004 when it came out or overtly of any time really. And I think that also works in its favor a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely one. I would say the beauty of this pilot, and Max, you brought it up in the beginning, of the idea that it seems timeless. I feel like if this fall Desperate Housewives had the first episode, all of us would be bought in and have no questions about it. There wasn't anything that very much stuck it in, hey, this is an early 2000s show by any means of the word. But I will say, we watched it. It sounds like we enjoyed it. I'd love to hear from you guys. Would you continue watching this show? Is this something that you would consider binge-worthy? You're watching every single episode, or maybe you need one or two more to get on the bandwagon?
For me, it's 100%. I want to keep going with this. I could definitely do 179 more episodes easily. I feel it's insane to me that for season one, this averaged just shy of 24 million viewers an episode, with 30 for the season one finale. And I'm just imagining the Desperate Housewives phenomenon in the social media age and just like how aflame we would all be talking about this and the power this show had without social media. Yeah, I actually really want to know what did Mary Alice do, and I plan to absolutely continue watching this.
What about you,
I
Rich?
couldn't help but agree. Like I was actually, if I had more time, I would have like sat and watched number two like straight away afterwards, just for like my own enjoyment, not even taking notes for this. But I think should this show actually like start up again in 2022, you'd have to like reconcile with a little bit more technology being involved in the show, which would be difficult, or you'd have to make it like a period piece, which I think this is kind of like bouncing back and forth between, and we've covered this topic a little bit, bouncing back and forth between modern and more 1950s tropes and stuff like that of suburbia. But I mean, I'm definitely gearing up for episode 2. I don't know if I'm giving it 180 episodes, but good God, that's quite a bit of TV. But I am absolutely down, and I think we're definitely having a bros Desperate Housewives watch party after this.
We've been cleared for landing, gentlemen, because I will already tell you, I've seen every single episode of Desperate Housewives. It's a fantastic series. It's been a while since I've seen the pilot, and the pilot just does such a fantastic job of drawing you in and wanting to, unfortunately, be a neighbor in Wisteria Lane. With that said, as we are set to sign off, gentlemen, where can we find you? Where can we learn more about each of you?
If you don't watch this show, folks, you are Wisteria lame. You can find me on all things social at Maxwell Sing, as well as at Dadwagon Comedy on TikTok.
Follow us on Dadwagon Comedy on TikTok for comedy sketches that Max and I make. I'm going to severely apologize and put out an Apple Notes apology on my Instagram. Damn, that's Rich, for Max's horrible Wisteria lame joke.
And you can find me at Run Geoff Run. You can also find us at TV Pilots License Podcasts on Twitter. You can
somewhere.
It's somewhere. It's all. You can also find us on Instagram at that same handle. If you have questions for the show, if you want to just send us how much you like the show, make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or Google Music. Subscribe for weekly episodes, and you can also email at us at tvpilotslicense@gmail.com. With that said, you are cleared to take off your seatbelt. We look forward to speaking with you again someday soon.